Ooh. Hello, YouTubers! My name's Willie. Welcome to my channel. Today I have reaction request 128. The Lamenters of the Cursed Founding. This is one of the Cursed Founding series brought to us by Arch Warhammer and has been requested by CJ Falcon. So let's check it out. Keep this series rolling. Alright, ready and play. Dun, dun. Dun, 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 dun. Greetings
and salutations, friends, and welcome back to yet another Warhammer 40k lore video. We are once again going to be talking about the Cursed Founding, and today we shall talk about the Lamenters, a rather odd little chapter, everything considered. They were one of the more quote-unquote successful results of the Cursed Founding, because it would appear that not only were they free of mutations or debilitating mental diseases, but the scientists had even managed to actually fix something. The Lamenters are a founding chapter based off the Blood Angels. Now, some of you may know, the Blood Angels have a bit of a problem with, well, space vampirism, essentially. They essentially fall prey to something known as the Black Rage and the Red Thirst. In combination, these two wonderful little attributes turn them into crazed, psychotic killing machines. This is based on a flaw in the gene seed of Sanguinius, and it was worsened quite considerably during the Horus Heresy, where the Blood Angels briefly fell under the spell of Khorne, at the very least partially. That was obviously not particularly good for their psyche, and the curse has gotten a hell of a lot worse since then, and with the death of Sanguinius, well, that sure as fuck didn't help. Despite this, however, the Blood Angels managed to avoid most of the stigma that would normally be associated with such a, unstable personality.
Yeah.
Partially due to the fact that they were, of course, a founding legion, which gave them a fair bit of, gloss and a bit of leeway when it came to acting like crazed psychopaths. Additionally, of course, Sanguinius was known to be one of the most perfect of all the Primarchs, and his flaw was hidden rather well. Their successor chapters, however, have been a little bit less successful on occasion. The Flesh Tearers chapter, for example.
Ooh.
Well, first and foremost, maybe you shouldn't have named yourself the fucking Flesh Tearers.
Maybe.
That's a pretty obvious indication that something is really, really wrong with you bastards, but hey, details. For the Lamenters, however, the great breakthrough was that they had apparently managed to cure the Red Thirst and the Black Rage. The Lamenters at first seemed to be completely and utterly untouched by these curses of their founding chapters. And as previously mentioned, they didn't have any mutations, no giant bone knives growing from their arms, no horns, no third arms or sixth heads, nothing like that. They appeared to be completely normal. Hell, they even appeared to be mentally stable, which was exceedingly unusual for the 21st founding. Despite that, however, they still had the shadow of the Cursed Founding hanging over them, and many chapters, despite the fact that the Lamenters appeared to be free of any and all taint, still refused to work with them, assuming that whatever taint they did inevitably have was simply just really, really well hidden. This led to some unfortunate events later on in their history, but for the moment at least, they were relatively free of the stigma that had plagued the other chapters. And indeed, when many of the other 21st founding chapters started turning to chaos or otherwise revolting against the Imperium, the Lamenters were one of relatively few who remained loyal. And instead of getting caught up with the internecine conflicts at the heart of the Imperium, they decided to use their mobility as a fleet-based chapter to head towards the outer rims of the Imperium. This, they hoped, would remove themselves so far away from their heretical brethren that their reputation, quote-unquote, would not precede them. And to a certain extent, they were correct. They got far enough away from the heartland of the Imperium to more or less outrun their reputation as a cursed founding chapter.
Huh.
And they spent 1,500 years scouring the westernmost reaches of the Imperium for aliens and all manners of horrible things, spending most of their time rescuing outlying colonial worlds and helping out on a relatively small scale. The Western fringes are not usually cursed with massive, horrible shit like, round the Eye of Terror or anything, but there are always plenty of angry aliens and uprisings to deal with, so they had plenty to do on the Western fringes, while also managing to stay mostly out of the way of any incoming inquisitorial probes. However, there was one small thing that seemed a little bit off about the chapter. Despite having provided valuable aid to many a new settler world on the western fringes, and generally speaking conducting themselves with bravery, honor, and, perhaps most importantly, efficiency, they seem to be unusually unlucky. To begin with, it was mostly just, small things. Weapons jamming unnaturally often, knives breaking upon even the flimsiest of armor, running out of ammunition despite knowing for sure they brought more than enough. Thunderhawks just kind of falling out of the sky because their engines blew up. Like that. And then it got worse. Lots worse. And it seems to be continuously escalating. While it may have started with simple equipment malfunctions, then they started being unlucky in everything else. Their maneuvers would be read by the enemy, they would arrive too late to save a civilian population, they'd walk straight into a Xenos trap, and so on and so on and so on. Being Astartes, of course, they usually managed to bludgeon their way out of even the most inconvenient situation, but they were really starting to wonder how they could possibly be this unlucky for such an extended period of time. In fact, this started wearing upon the entire chapter. They became somewhat famous for a melancholic mood. This might also be due to the fact that they started to realize that maybe, just maybe, they hadn't gotten out of the founding quite as untouched as they originally thought, because surely no chapter can be this unlucky for this long without having a certain touch of the warp about them. But hey, at least so far it hadn't been anything particularly horrifying. They'd gotten screwed over here and there, and their shit kept malfunctioning, and they'd gotten into a fair few uncomfortable last stands over the course of their careers, but everything considered, they were doing relatively well. They were mostly fighting relatively low-level Xenos and alien invaders, local gatherings of aliens with many limbs, the occasional Hrud migration, some raiding Dark Eldar here and there, nothing overly problematic, some low-level chaos infestations, but nothing really on a proper scale, no full-on chaos outbreaks or anything, just the occasional civilian population that had taken a wrong turn on to Hell or Heaven Street. And it was right around this time that the chapter's librarians began sensing something unusual, as if a gargantuan cosmic middle finger was rising out of the distance, and shortly thereafter, the chapter received word that they were to head back into the Imperium, to the very heart of the Imperium indeed, and take up position near the Eye of Terror. Middle finger in fucking deed. The Lamenters in all due likelihood knew what this meant. It meant that they were being thrown onto the absolute front line of the most horrible thing ever. They were about to eat some serious shit. Some shit they had never even come close to really contemplating up until this particular point. They also knew that somebody, somewhere, had it in for them, but on the other hand, they had carefully cultivated a pretty damn good image so far. They were considered to be far more steadfast and sturdy than most cursed founding chapters, and there was absolutely no doubt whatsoever about their loyalties, which, again, was pretty goddamn unusual, considering they were part of the 21st founding. and as such, simply just getting on their back legs at this point and going, no, 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 we're not going to that place, would undoubtedly draw a fair bit of suspicion their way. So they didn't really have much in the way of choice other than to pack up their gear and head towards the Eye of Terror, fully aware that this was probably not going to end well. And surprise, surprise, the intergalactic middle finger did not take particularly long to roger the Lamenters right up the bumhole. In fact, one of their first combat assignments was a defensive one, where they were to be supported by the Mortifactors chapter. Unfortunately for them, the Mortifactors viewed their positioning alongside a chapter of the Cursed Founding to be unfortunate. Now, the Mortifactors take Emperor Bothering to an entirely new level, and they viewed the Lamenters as sinners in waiting, and they most certainly were not willing to share a battlefield with them. And so they simply just left. Leaving the hive world of Corellia relatively undefended. It was defended by its local PDF, a handful of guards, and the Lamenters. A planet that was supposed to be defended by 2 entire chapters were now defended by 1. During a Black Crusade. Oh well. What could possibly go? Oh shit, Chaos invades. Who could see that coming? It's a vaguely shitty situation, to put it rather mildly, but it does show the nobility of the Lamenters chapter. I can imagine many chapters just simply going, fuck this, I am out, prioritizing to maintain their own fighting strength, being Astartes after all, rather than sacrificing much of said strength for the benefit of a civilian population. After all, at the end of the day, a single Astartes is worth a hell of a lot more than virtually a limitless number of civilians. But the Lamenters chose to stay and fight, and swiftly found themselves in shit up to their goddamn armpits, as they had to hold off an entire splinter of a Black Crusade for 6 solar weeks. That is a long time to be dodging artillery and bolter rounds. During the 6 weeks of near constant running battles, the Lamenters were reduced from what I assume to be full strength. After all, they had been relatively lightly engaged on the western fringes. They would, at the very least, have numbered some 900 Astartes, and perhaps as many as 200 to 400 scouts, awaiting initiation. So all in all, we're talking anything from 1,000 to 1,200, with of course not all of them being full Astartes. And during the 6 weeks of combat, they were reduced to 200 brothers. That is a rather severe rate of attrition for any Astartes chapter. They would probably have been completely wiped out, but in the 11th hour, reinforcements led by the Ultramarines and White Scars chapter managed to break through the encircling fleets and relieve the Lamenters on the high world of Corilla. The Lamenters had been savaged rather horribly, but the 9th Black Crusade had been defeated, and they were still at decent strength, 1/4 roundabout. Not great, but not disastrous either. Or, well, pretty fucking disastrous, but not chapter-ending disaster. And in light of their somewhat, shall we say, reduced combat effectiveness, the High Lords decided that it was time to withdraw the Lamenters from the front line around the Eye of Terror, and give them some time to recuperate. Very nice of them, don't you think? But unfortunately for the Lamenters, their shit was only just beginning. When they withdrew from the front line, they naturally moved through the warp. They'd done so hundreds of times previously. Thousands, probably. And nothing had ever gone horrifyingly wrong. This time, however, these ships went in, and they just didn't come back out again. That's a problem. The Lamenters chapter was stuck in the warp for God only knows how long. They popped back into the material realm 100 years later. But considering the fact that time and the warp flows exceedingly differently, nobody knows how long the poor little bastards were actually stuck in there. They could have been stuck in there for tens of thousands of years, for all we know. An example of this would be from the Horus Heresy book series, where Horus pops into a portal, is gone for like half an hour, comes back out again, and goes like, wow, you're still here after several hundred years. That's fucking dedication. So, yeah, nobody really knows. But it must be said that, again, the Lamenters did not appear to be any worse for wear. They still weren't riddled with mutations like 6 assholes, 7 arms, and 4 feathers, or anything like that.
Yeah.
They appear to be, relatively speaking, mentally stable, although they were kind of getting sick of the universe's shit at this point, undoubtedly, and just a general sense of melancholy, because, additionally, all of their chapter librarians were reading the Emperor's Tarot, and every single time the cards came up, you're fucked. And it's only gonna get rougher from here on out.
Nice.
Which undoubtedly would put a somewhat, severe damper on their collective mood.
You would think.
But hey, they'd been lost in the warp for, at the very least, 100 years. Now again, granted, in warp time it could have been a week or 10,000 years, but nevertheless, they had appeared back in the material world, presumably after having fought their way through whatever bullshit was trapping them, and they appeared completely unaffected by the warping effects and corrupting effects of the warp. That is pretty damn impressive, and undoubtedly earned them a fair bit of admiration from the more puritanical parts of the Imperium. Now, let me put this into perspective, yeah? The Inquisition look for even the slightest hint of deviancy, especially in the Astartes, because they would like to avoid a second Horus Heresy, unsurprisingly.
Yeah.
A chapter reappears in Imperium space after having been lost in the warp for 100 years. Normally, they'd probably just be killed, because you can't take any chances. The mere fact that the Lamenters have not been classified as excommunicatus traitoris is pretty goddamn telling. That means that the Inquisition had a look at them and decided, yeah, no, they're actually fine.
Weird.
I'm surprised too. And you can safely bet your lily-white little ass that the Inquisition did check. They are not known for being on the lazy side when it comes to potential corruption.
Huh.
And not only
Yeah.
that, mind you, not only did the Inquisition not move against the chapter openly, but it was decided to allow the chapter, in light of their trials and tribulations, time to reorganize, regroup, and regrow to full strength. Now, if the Imperium has its doubt about a chapter, but they don't want to move openly against them, or they might think that, the doubts are unclear, they are circumstantial, but still dangerous, what the Imperium will do is order the weakened chapter into the most hideously dangerous of battlegrounds, and hope that when they emerge on the other side, there's going to be so few of them left that the chapter can be safely disbanded. But in the case of the Lamenters, they didn't. They allowed them the time and the resources to fully rebuild.
There's other
Somebody
chapters that they gave so much credit
in these
to.
Motherfuckers. A lot of faith.
But then again,
they
this
gave
is what
makes
credit
the
to the
Lamenters
Inquisition.
so really, really tragic. They are probably amongst the most loyal and most fervent of the Imperium's defenders, and yet they just keep getting shat on. I'm almost of the opinion that the Chaos Powers look at them and go like, wow, these fucking Boy Scouts, I'm going to make it my personal mission to screw them over no matter how long it takes. Unusually enough, however, the chapter actually managed to pass the next few years relatively quietly. No major mishaps wiping out half the chapter, no intergalactic fuck-ups threatening to kill all of them. They actually managed to rebuild their chapter to a decent level, and,
nice.
More importantly, their fleet. How unusual. It's almost as if somebody's planning something horrible for them, isn't it? The lull before the storm and all that. In 587 of the 41st millennia, the chapter was assigned to defend the Maelstrom Zone. This is a portion of Imperial space with a, relatively speaking, minor warp rift. It's basically like a baby eye of terror. The region is obviously plagued with plenty of chaos incursions in the form of raiders, pirates, etc., popping in and out of the little rift, but compared to the Eye of Terror, it is, relatively speaking, safe. No major Black Crusades have been launched from it because, as I said, it is, relatively speaking, small. That still means that anyone assigned to the local area is going to have their hands full dealing with all manners of shit when it comes to chaos infestation. And obviously, the lure of chaos is rather strong in the local area, which means that the civilian population has a nasty habit of rising up in violent orgies of bloodletting and killing, or occasionally just plain old orgies. And due to the rather, shall we say, volatile nature of the local space, a fair few Astartes chapters are assigned to patrol the area. One of which the Lamenters became absolute bestest of friends with, the Astral Claws. And anyone who's read about this story previously will be facepalming rather viciously right about this point. By the way, this is the prelude to a much, much larger conflict, which I will be doing a full series on at some point in the very distant future. You see, the Astral Claws actually treated the Lamenters as decent people. They viewed them not as a chapter of the 21st founding, but as a chapter of noble and very, very well reputed Astartes, because they were. The Lamenters have an honor roll that would be the envy of many of the older chapters. By any and all metrics, the Lamenters have been doing very well for themselves. They are unquestionably one of the Imperium's most steadfast and loyal defenders, but they were never treated as such due to the fact that they were a part of the 21st founding. And now that they had run into Astartes who actually treated them with a modicum of respect, it's unsurprising that they would grow rather fond of said chapter.
Yeah.
Unfortunately for the Lamenters, the shadow of the galactic middle finger was still hanging heavily over the chapter, and it swiftly turned out that perhaps they should have picked better friends. Because the Astral Claws were about to rebel against the Imperium. And even better, they were about to turn fully and completely to chaos. The Astral Claws had been completely corrupted. Because of course they had.
Darn it.
The Lamenters just cannot catch a fucking break. And to make matters even worse, the Lamenters did not see this coming. They had not had enough contact with the Astral Claws after they had broken with the Imperium to see them for what they had truly become. The Astral Claws had simply told the Lamenters that the Inquisition were the ones who had opened hostilities, and that this was an attack upon the independence of Astartes chapters within the Imperium. The Lamenters were convinced that they were fighting for their right to remain as Astartes, and as such they had to defend their battle brothers in the Astral Claws, completely oblivious as to what had actually happened.
Oh no.
As such, they fought on the side of the traitors for an uncomfortable amount of time, until finally being brought to bear by the fucking Minotaurs chapter. Oh, that has got to suck. And to make matters even worse, alright, this is gonna sting, so bring out whatever you need to hide your manly tears, because this is a sad story. The Lamenters' main base, their primary battle barge, a vessel by the name of Mater Lacrimarum, was discovered by the Minotaurs orbiting the feral world of Optera, taking on supplies. In a lightning strike, the Minotaurs, being specialists in fleet engagements, knocked out the chapter battle barge's plasma drives, meaning that it would be entirely impossible for the lumbering vessel to flee. The vessel was also where the Lamenters kept all of their equipment, their supplies, their sacred relics, and perhaps most importantly, their wounded. This forced the Lamenters to all try, in one last desperate, large-scale pitch battle, to defend their battle barge against the Minotaurs. At this point, the Lamenters had been severely reduced in numbers after an extended conflict. The Minotaurs, however, were practically full strength, and experts in ship-to-ship boarding actions. Over a ferocious period of 17 solar hours, the Minotaurs slowly but surely battered and bruised the Lamenters into submission. The losses on both sides were excruciatingly heavy, but eventually it became apparent that the Minotaurs were about to gain full control of the Mater Lacrimarum, and with the lives of their wounded battle brothers at stake, the Lamenters surrendered. It was the only thing they could do to ensure that their wounded would not be butchered in their beds. And the Minotaurs must clearly have seen some spark of nobility in the poor Lamenters, because they accepted their surrender.
Wow.
Now, surprisingly, Astartes are not particularly used to accepting the surrender of anyone they consider to be renegades or traitors of any kind, and yet with the Lamenters they did. The precise numbers captured are unknown, but we know that at the end of the conflict known as the Badab War, 311 Battle Brothers had survived the internment aboard the prison hulk orbiting Sagan II. And at the end of the conflict, being Astartes, they were presented before a tribunal of other Astartes, chapter masters that had not taken part in the Badab War. The Inquisition pushed to be given full authority over the proceedings, but the Astartes refused. And so the secessionist chapters, the Lamenters, and a few others were all tried and found guilty of breaking with the Codex Astartes and breaking their vows to the God Emperor. However, they had not fought against their loyalist brethren out of any lingering chaos corruption or any renegade sympathies. They had fought from pride. They believed that the Inquisition's justified attacks upon the Astral Clause was in breach with their independence as Astartes, and even more specifically, in the breach of their independence promised to them as Wardens of the Maelstrom. This was taken into consideration, and so, rather than purging the chapters in question, they were all convicted to undergo a 100-year-long Pentient Crusade, which, everything considered, and it might not sound like it, was a pretty lenient punishment. There was one clause, however. During the 100 years Pentient Crusades, the Lamenters would be forbidden from recruiting any further neophytes to replenish their ranks. In other words, their survival would be wholly up to themselves and the Emperor's beneficence. And again, while this might sound rather harsh, it was actually a pretty soft punishment. Again, these had rebelled rather directly against the Imperium and his most holy Inquisition. And in addition to that, they had also sided with excommunicatus traitoris space marines, chaos marines, to put it rather bluntly. Obviously enough, that is not something that is usually forgiven with any kind of punishment short of death. So, yeah, life, although conditional life over the course of 100 years, is fairly lenient. And to begin with, once again, the lull before the storm, the chapter did pretty well. It managed to carry out most of its sentence without any further major mishaps. And that's when Tyranid Hive Fleet Kraken wandered directly into their path. Oh, fuck. Now here's the thing. A chapter on a Pentient Crusade may not shy away from danger. That is part of the requirement. They are not allowed to simply not carry out their actions and duties to the best of their abilities. They may not avoid danger. They may not ignore pleas for help because it would put their own survival at risk. They quite literally have to head towards every single conflict they come across. But here is a slight inconsistency in their lore. So, when they ran into Hive Fleet Kraken, and had been fighting it for quite some time, apparently receiving considerable casualties, they are said to have been reduced to 4 companies worth of Astartes. This is rather odd, because even if we take the largest possible numbers from the end of the Badab War, they would not have numbered more than 400, and that would be the absolute maximum if we take into consideration the roughly 100 or so Battle Brothers that were engaged elsewhere, and was later reunited with their incarcerated brethren, and again assuming that neither of them took any further casualties between then and running into Hive Fleet Kraken, a period of some 80-odd years. In fact, they were almost done with their Pentient Crusade when Hive Fleet Kraken appeared. They were convicted in 912, Millennia 41, and they ran into Kraken in 992, Millennia 41. The God Emperor weeps manly tears whenever he thinks of the poor Lamenters, I swear. Poor, poor little bastards. But yeah, the numbers do not make up. If they were barely numbering 4 companies at the start of their pension crusade, they could not possibly be numbering 4 companies after their fight with Hive Fleet Kraken. And then, apparently after having yet another few years of heavy engagement with the Tyranid Hive Fleet, they had been reduced to 3 companies. And again, they cannot recruit during this time, and yet they seem to have increased in numbers. Now, I personally think this is just kind of shoddy writing. Like, the guy who wrote about the Badab War didn't check up on the Lamenters backstory when it came to Hive Fleet Kraken, and so just kind of wrote stuff down that sounded alright. An honest mistake, not really to be blamed on the writer, and you could basically just make up a fluff reason saying that, Imperial records were wrong. Wouldn't be the fucking first time. Or, let's be a little bit conspiratorial here. Maybe, just maybe, all of the shit the poor Lamenters have gone through, all of the crap they've had to wade through, all of the misfortune, all of the hate, all of the sheer, undiluted horse shit that has been poured down their necks for centuries finally made them think, you know what? Fuck this shit. We're gonna live. If for no other reason than to prove all those dirty sons of sackcloth motherfuckers wrong. And as so, they secretly began recruiting again. Now again, bear in mind, I don't have anything to substantiate this, but it would kinda make sense from the numbers, but good God, would that not be the most tragic thing ever? To have gone through all of that shit, only to become traitors at the absolute 11th hour. It sounds like the kind of ending that's just a little bit too sad to contemplate. And yet, at the same time, we are talking about the Lamenters here, aren't we? Until next time, I have been Arch. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope to see you all again soon.
You too, Arch.
Have a good day. If you can, after listening to this.
Okay, well, learned plenty about the Lamentors. Okay, so apparently they branch off of the Blood Angels, which had an issue with being vampires, and were one of the Lamenters ended up being one of the more successful out of this batch of Marines. A lot of other Marines refused, a lot of other Astartes refused to help the Lamentors because of their upbringing, but they remained very loyal. Apparently they were a fleet-based chapter and had amazingly bad luck. Eventually they were thrown on the front line near the Eye of Terror, where Chaos invaded, and they ended up fighting the Black Crusades for quite a while. Eventually, the Ultramarines came in and relieved them, only for them to get stuck in the warp for 100 years. More, less, we don't know. Here, it was 100 years, which is still quite a while. They ended up getting assigned to a rift and to guard it, and the Astro Claws befriended them. They finally had a friendly Astartes group on their side. And then they betrayed the Emperor. And the Claws convinced their buddies, the Lamentors, to betray the Emperor as well. And after a whole bunch of fighting, they were eventually sent on a penitent crusade where they ended up running right into Hive Fleet Kraken. Just a whole bunch of horrible things have happened to this group. They just can't seem to catch a break. Although there's several occasions they seem to catch breaks. Like not being destroyed or not being sent to their deaths. Things like that. This punishment of the penitent crusade, it shows their loyalty if they're like, well, we can't really... Why? They weren't technically doing anything wrong, but because they were mixed up with a bad group, so they still need to be punished, but they can't really be offed. Anyways, real brilliant. This was done by Arch as part of Arch's The Beast Arises series, where he examines and draws lore from the Beast Arises book series. If you want to check out Arch Warhammer's stuff, there's a link in the description to help you find it. This was also requested by CJ Falcon. My thoughts. The poor Lamenters. Wow. It's just an influx of back and forth, calm, chaos, and yet they remained quite loyal, it seems. So, yeah. I would hate to have the luck like them, that's for sure. But that's about all I got to say on that matter. So, till next time, Willie, out.
If you like the video, stay tuned for more content. And as always, feel free to comment. Have a good one.